All right. So we are nearing the end of October, which if you're like most people out there, or like if you have kids, you're probably hearing a lot about Halloween or all these different fall festivities that everybody is having. I know I had a couple teenagers at my house last night making their own costumes, which I love because that saves me money. Yay. But this month we are focusing on the identity of the military spouse. And that really just came from a few questions I've been asked from military spouses of how they own who they are as a person and how they have their own why and purpose in life right alongside their commitment to walk with their service member and their spouse. So today I'm super excited. It's our third episode, and I have asked a good friend of mine, Melissa Cushman, to come in and give her perspective on military spouse identity. And I met Melissa in a very weird way, but that's just how life is in the military community. I say it was a weird way because our moms met somehow and then introduced us. And without going into too many details, I feel like that is exactly how it is within the military community, especially, but probably life in general. Like the world is smaller than what we think it is. But I'm so grateful to both her and her husband and their family. They have been such a blessing to my family and so thankful for their friendship. So I will turn it over to you, Melissa, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I have been a military spouse for 20 years. I don't know when that happened, when I became a senior spouse. I have a son and a daughter and three dogs. Um, we have lived all over, both in the continental US and in Germany, um, in our military time. So I think we're a pretty classic military family as far as that goes. We've moved a lot. We've lived overseas, um, and been through deployments, been through separations for work and things like that. So kind of experienced a little bit of all the slices of military life.
Yeah, it's like so wide and so vast. all the different things that make a military life the way it
It
is.
it's true, but then there's also so many commonalities of, you
Mm,
know, oh, you were overseas, I was overseas, or I wish I could have gone overseas, or, I never went overseas, but my parents did, and I grew up in Germany. And I was just posting about an Oktoberfest party that we have every year. And a friend that I don't even know from the military, but grew up in the military, was like, "Oh my gosh, I love Bratkartoffel. I grew up on that stuff when we lived in Germany when my dad was in the army." Um, and so there's a lot of shared experience, even if you're not sharing it at the same time.
yes. Yes, you're exactly right. And it's kind of funny because I think that's how we're able to relate and connect with each other is because we have those commonalities. So we understand
Absolutely.
what it's like.
Yeah, yeah. So even if you've not lived at the same army base, there's, a lot of bases have similar issues or similar communities, and so you can still bond over that, even if you haven't been at the same place. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
as
Act-
far as identity goes, I think it's a really interesting question. Um, when you first join the military as a spouse, you I say join, you technically aren't joining, but you're being dragged along. Um, the your identity gets swallowed up. Um, not necessarily in a bad way, but it was very interesting to me the first time I went to a doctor's appointment, and they asked for my husband's social security instead of mine. And I was
Mm.
like, do I matter? And they're like, no, we don't need your social security. And I'm like, I mean, it was such a funny thing because it was a little bit of like your identity prior to this no longer exists. you are now tied to this person.
Mm,
You're even labeled as a dependent, um, and all of that informs how you feel, right? So I think a lot of spouses lose a little bit of their sense of identity, and take on this spouse role more so than in the civilian community, um,
mm,
because there is a lot more. I don't want to say more expectation, but I think the inequality of workload is a little bit bigger in military families, when there is a only one active duty person in the relationship. Um, a lot of things just default to the spouse. So it can definitely become all consuming, and it can become your sole identity as I'm the rock. I'm the one who is always here. I'm the one that solves the problems regardless, because I can't necessarily rely on the service member, to come in and save the day, because they might not be available to save the day. Um, so, you know, I think a lot of spouses, especially once their kids are getting older, start to kind of have an identity crisis. Um,
mm,
they've been a lot more military spouses stay home than their civilian, similarly educated counterparts, which is an interesting statistic, but makes sense, um, given the lifestyle demands. But so these typically, highly qualified people who maybe had professional careers before they married their spouse have kids and maybe look at re-entering the workforce when those kids are 12, 15, um, and that means they've been out of work for 10 or 15 years, and I say out of work, out of paid work. Obviously, they've been very busy, um, but it's it's then well, what do I do? Do I go back to the person I was before I raised kids?
mm,
Are you even that same person? Do you enjoy the things that you used to do before you had kids, before you had all these life experiences? Um, is your career relevant anymore? Sometimes your career might not even exist anymore. um, so, I think it's something that we struggle with as a population. Um, how do we separate ourselves and maintain our own identities, uh, throughout this process? I know it's something I've struggled with. Um, have you felt like that, Chris?
Yeah, I have. And the word that stuck out to me that you just mentioned was a dependent, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of interesting because there's the whole different part of relationships of like dependency and codependency and all of that, which I'm sure that you come across that at some point. But I've been studying that part a little bit more recently, and the word dependent means that the root word is that you're depending on that other person for some sort of
Right.
sustainability, which in a sense can be true because the service member provides, just looking at it from like a logical needs perspective, provides the medical insurance we get from their commitment, the paycheck, the housing, the food allowance. All those things come from the service member's contract with the military. So in a sense, yeah, the word makes sense. Like you have a dependency on them. But at the same time, everything you just stated, if something goes wrong at the house, like especially if they're deployed or in training or working crazy hours, which I'm sure we've all experienced as spouses, we know we are the ones that are looked to sustain and make sure everything keeps running, even beyond just
Right.
caring for the children, like everything. A lot of us have power of attorneys,
Mm-hmm.
signature authorities for things to sign for on the home front. We're like the home front, CEO or manager. So that word dependent, I haven't heard that perspective yet, but that really stood out to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really just hit me very hard when we first got married. And it was one of those situations where, when we got married, it was after my husband had graduated from college and he, didn't really work I mean, he didn't work a lot when he was in college. He did like side jobs and stuff like that. I worked full time, going to school full time.
Mm,
And so like when we did things, I usually paid because I had a salary.
mm,
And then we got married and there was this huge paradigm shift. And then it was like, oh, and now I'm the dependent. Now I'm the one. And in our case, it was a little bit more extreme too, because our first duty station was Germany. So
mm,
we went, I went from having a support system to you're moving across the Atlantic. You don't know anybody but that one person, and you are dependent on them for everything. How do I get somewhere to get a driver's license? How do I get anything? Um, and so it was just like, oh, I'm I'm a dependent now. um, but like you said, in reality, my husband is incredibly dependent on me for day to day life.
mm.
I mean, I think there would be a huge struggle, and he thankfully is very well aware of this, and he kind of jokes about it that like he could never lose me because he'd have to hire, a teacher for the kids, a nanny, a personal shopper, a financial manager, a garden crew, you know, all of those jobs that he doesn't really, take a huge role in, but get done. The magical fairy that takes the dirty clothes, turns them into clean clothes, and they just show up in his closet. Um, that person would be gone if I was gone. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think that it is, if you don't have a husband who is affirming about your contribution, it can definitely kind of strip away that of like, I am I'm not an independent person anymore. I am dependent on this person. I am not whole without them,
Mm.
right? Um, but at the same time, I'm going to take them away. They're going to be deployed for a year, you know.
Well,
Um,
it's another part what you brought up that I wanted to go back to, and especially like going overseas, but really going anywhere when you're stripped away from when you go from base or installation to installation, or you go for the first time and you probably leave family friends when you first marry a service member and you lose that support system or you're just your local community. I think that there is probably different experiences, but this is where the commonality piece comes in from spouse to spouse on if they have a positive experience migrating into the next installation or not. Because the difference is the service member spouse, they are going to have people that they go to work with every day. And how that integration looks for them is probably different because whether they're sponsored or not sponsored, or they have a good in processing experience, at least they're going to see those people every day and they're going to build some sort of working relationship or possibly friendship with their colleagues. The
right,
spouse, however, it could be different. I've had experience where I've gotten to a base and it's been like super awesome and there's been support groups and all the things. But then I've been to other installations where it's kind of like you're a little bit of a lone wolf and you just got to figure it out and you're not going to work with people every day, you know? So I think that might be like, I don't know what your experience has been, but that might be a commonality struggle that spouses experience.
oh, absolutely. And I think that it really does. So that first time is usually going to be the hardest because you don't know where the resources are, and neither does
Mm,
your spouse necessarily, right? So they might hear things, but they don't know what ACS is. They don't know what the spouses club entails, and if it's going to be a welcoming spouse club or not. Um, After your first time, I think that makes a big difference in how you feel about the next move, you know? As an introvert myself, I think that the hardest part about moving is if you're an introvert, you can very easily not find your people
Mm,
because you have to put yourself out there. And that's not something most introverts enjoy. Um, but I always, tell myself and tell other people, like, you just, those first like couple of months, just say yes to everything. And then you figure out what you actually want to do and what you actually, you find your people. But if you don't go to the thing and show up, you're not going to find your people. Um,
yeah.
so that's such an important thing. And like our relationship, the longer you're in the military, the harder it is to move somewhere and not know somebody,
Mm,
for better or worse, right? I don't think I could move anywhere in the world now and not have at least 6 degrees of separation to somebody who would be willing to check out a house for me like you did, or you know be there when I need them to pick up keys or something like that, because I might not know somebody, but I'm sure that I have a friend who is stationed there and knows somebody who still lives there, and they would be happy to help me, um, because we've all been there. So again, we go back to that commonality of experiences where, you know, maybe as an introvert, I wouldn't go up and see somebody I'd never met and look at a house for them in the normal world, but in the military world, I would be like, oh yes, absolutely, I'll do that for you, person I've never met. um, because I know what it's like to need that and not have somebody to do it for you. So um, it just makes it a different experience. And it makes you a little braver, I guess, to put your feelers out there because you've been rewarded in the past for putting yourself out there. So um, maybe I don't like going to clubs, but if you meet a group of people going to a club, the next time you move, you're going to be more inclined to go to a club there because you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll find my people again if I put myself out there.
you said club, and I'm like, you go to a dance club, and then I'm like, oh, maybe you mean like a mom club or a chess
I
club or a
mean,
sewing
I mean like
club.
a mom. Yeah,
Because
maybe
I was like, a
my
dance club?
no, definitely not a dance club. I mean, that might be somebody's thing, though, for sure. There are definitely people who would be meeting at the club. I think you've been hanging out with your teenagers too much.
Well,
Um,
that was my first thought when you said club, and then I was like, wait, she probably means like a mom club.
um, I mean, it depends on like the age of your kids, right? So,
Yeah.
we've homeschooled many times, so that's always a good opportunity. They have like mother's night out or parents' night out, or just community meetups where your kids can meet other friends. Um,
Mm,
I love um, dog training. That's what I do for a living, and I belong or am joining a local dog club in where we live now. So it's about finding wherever your people are and seeking them out. Maybe you love Dungeons and Dragons. Every community has a Dungeons and Dragons club. So you just have to reach out and say, is this my type of Dungeons and Dragons? um, but they exist. It's definitely but you've gotta put the effort in. And that's the hardest part for sure, especially if you're not a natural extrovert who's not super thrilled about putting themselves in these awkward situations. But
I think it changes over time too, because it was so funny. I took a personality test before COVID,
Hmm.
And then I took one and I was like high on the extrovert. And then I took one after COVID and living on a military installation where we experienced the military installation shutting down, the childcare shut down, the school shut down. We were very limited on when we could leave post and when we come back to post, like all the different things. Um, and I took the same personality test again at work at like 4 years apart after COVID. And it was like severely introvert. I was like, what happened?
Well, I think that happened to a lot of people
Yeah.
from COVID. I
Yeah.
think that was definitely a shared experience. Um, and you're right. I mean, it totally does. What we're comfortable with, what we're interested in, is going to change. Um, and you know, how we even find those people is going to change. I mean, we've been
Yeah.
I've been in the army, as a spouse long enough that when we lived in Germany the first time, we looked for an apartment using a newspaper.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Not, I already said we've been married for 20 years, so I already dated myself. But like, you know, obviously Facebook groups, have been a huge thing for social outlets. Um, Finding a good hairdresser, finding a good dentist, finding a good primary care doctor, all of those things um, that are necessary every time you move um, are so much easier now than they used to be. And I've definitely, even before I've arrived at some place, I've reached out and met people through Facebook groups in the city that I'm going to go to. And then you meet in person when you finally get there. So you can really hit the ground running and
Yeah.
meet people before you even show up to the physical location, um, which is helpful because, you know, like in our experience, we were only in the same place for a year. So we hit the ground running. You helped me find a house, and we were instantly friends after that.
Yeah.
We're like, and we're friends now.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's so funny because I love like the commonality piece creates the connection piece. And then from there, that sets the foundation for friendships and relationships. And, I recently reconnected with another military spouse, who I haven't seen in like 4 years. And I ran into her at another installation and her kids have grown now. Her kids are the ages that my kids were 4 years ago. And, my kids are all a little bit older now. And, we were reflecting back on pictures and just like how our minds have shifted a bit
mhm.
from the mindset we were in then compared to where we're at now in the different stages of parenting, career choices, moving from place to place. And the one part that you mentioned about just simply finding a doctor, like it's funny, I would imagine, and outside of the military, it's not as common to move that often.
Right,
And if you do move, it might just be like, oh, I'm moving to the city now. I'm not going to live in a suburb, or I'm moving to the suburb from the city, but I still really love my hairdresser. So I'm still going to go there every 4 months or whatever it is.
right, right.
Or I'm still going to drive to my favorite dentist or doctor. But in the military community, you don't have that luxury 9 times out of 10 because you're moving out of the state or out of the country. So it's slightly different than I think what others would experience, which is more significant and impactful than we might realize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, a big part of a spouse identity, going back to that piece of it is it's what we do. Um, and like I said, a lot of military spouses do stay home, don't work full time. Certainly some of them do. Um, but when you don't work full time, I think sometimes jobs can be very easily become our identity.
Mm,
And although like a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad is an identity, it makes you feel like that's the only part of you, right? So
mm,
like I am just a parent. I am just a like that's all I can contribute sort of thing.
mm,
Um, and I think that when you move a lot, it can be difficult to then establish interests or hobbies that identify you as something other than just a parent. Um, so, like in my situation, um, finding places to train the dog, uh, it- you know, we're hoping to be here a little bit longer than we were in California. We were only in California for a year, but the dog club that I'm joining, it takes 6 months to join.
Oh,
So I'm
wow.
like, if we were only here for a year, it would take me 6 months to join, and then we'd only be members for another 6 months before we move.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that that makes it difficult to, you know, because all of those parts make up our identity, right? Our hobbies, our interests, our, yes, obviously being a parent is part of your identity. Um, but when that rug is constantly being pulled out from you and you then have to find a new rug over and over again, um, it definitely can, you know, make it difficult. I think there can, be some silver linings to it, and that new places offer new opportunities. Um, I'm sitting at my son's rowing practice, and we did not have rowing as an option in the Central Valley in California. Um, although I guess you could have, the aqueduct, can they row, row in the aqueduct? Um, so moving allowed us to have this whole new, opportunity and a new identity for him as a rower. And I guess as us rowing parents. Um,
Yeah.
so, it can be, we've talked about this before. Every move in the military, you can take it as like, oh, I don't want to go there. There's something bad about it, whether it's Fort Polk and the mosquitoes and the heat or Fort Drum and the snow. Or you can say, I'm going to look at like, what are the opportunities there?
Mhm.
Oh, if I'm Fort Polk, then that means I can go, and go to New Orleans. I can go and be close to the coast. Um, in Fort Drum, I can do all these amazing winter sports. So it does force you to look for the good,
Mhm.
hunt the good, hunt the people that make you feel good, uh, hunt the good experiences that help form your life and identity. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, getting out of your comfort zone too, and
right?
each experience. And you made me think of something related to my son, but it can also apply to spouses. My oldest son just finished filling out all of his college applications. I think he's almost done. I think most of them are done, but hopefully they're done.
Right?
um, but yeah, I asked him, I was like, what were you writing about? And he always goes back to his ability to adapt to any situation. I mean, he's been moving around for military stuff his entire life. So he's got 17 years of experience of living in different places, going to different schools, transferring schools the middle of the year. And then now he's using that as, hey, this is what I have to bring based off of all of my experience as a military kid moving around, and I can adapt. I can talk to anyone. I can connect with anyone and just, get involved in any experience or, like you said, sport. But the spouses have the same thing. And one thing that I have seen when I talk to spouses, especially when we're looking at career goals, is, oh, I was just a spouse or I was just a mom. And I always stop them right there and I say, like, did you volunteer at the community center? Did you work at the education center? Did you run an officers club? Did you run like the pre-deployment stuff for the family or the during deployment? Like, was there an administrative work? All those different things, like facilitating the big events, even if you just hosted a mom group once a week and, it's like, oh, you provided snacks, you coordinated events, like all those things matter. They take time, they take work, and they also build on your experience overall as a person, which speaks to who you are. So in a way, it speaks to our own identity because whatever we put our energy into is obviously something that we could connect with.
Right. Um, I mean, I was talking to my sister recently, and um, she does work full time, but thankfully she can work from home, so she's got some flexibility. But um, I've got kiddos that sometimes well, they have a lot more doctor's appointments than a lot of kids, and I'm like, I don't know how I would work full time and take you guys to all of the appointments that you need to go to. Um, but even if it's just I have to be incredibly organized to help manage their, they do virtual school. So they need to be able to get their schoolwork done. I have to be able to take them to these appointments. I have to be able to get them to their activities. Um, so even if you're not, volunteering in a capacity outside of the home, you still are using a lot of organization skills, project management skills,
Yeah.
um, and I think that a lot of people do feel like that. Oh, I was just a stay-at-home mom, or oh, I just homeschooled. And I'm like, if you homeschooled, that meant you were a principal, you were a teacher,
Yeah,
you were,
exactly.
a teacher's aide, a curriculum builder. Um, you know, we might not have gotten paid for it, but those were all jobs that you did, and you had to rise to the level to be able to be successful at it. Um, so, yeah, it is. I do think that a lot of spouses sell themselves short on the
Mm.
things that we do when we don't have a W-2 to prove, you know, that somebody values your contribution this amount of dollars, you know?
No, absolutely. And I love the word contribution because it's like we're making the commitment right alongside the service member and we are contributing to their mission, right? Which
Hmm.
is so significant. So it's like without that relationship and that connection piece of what builds up the military community, it wouldn't run as successfully as it does. I think it's such an important piece of it. Okay, I have one more question for you, and it's still
Hmm.
related. I love asking this question, especially because like you have more experience. Like if you could go back, would you change anything or do anything differently?
Um, I don't think so. I don't know. So, our first like 10 years of marriage, we had 3 deployments. Um, and I think I would have put myself out there more during those deployments if I knew what I knew now, I guess. Um, and it's not that I didn't have a support system. I did have people. So it's not a huge regret, I guess, but I think that really working to tie when you're going through something in a unit specifically, if you have friends that are outside of that unit, it's fantastic and that's a great support system. But having people that are going through the exact same thing as you are at the exact same time is invaluable,
Mm,
um, because they're also not hearing from their spouse because they're on lockdown. They're also not, so it can help you just not be alone in that experience. Uh,
mm,
so I think I did that better as I got older and was more comfortable um, putting myself out there. I was talking to a group of teens the other day, and I think the thing that you really gain as an adult is that you're less you feel less shame about being awkward in a situation. I've got teenagers right now, and they're just so incredibly embarrassed by everything. Um, everything. And it's like, I remember that feeling of like wanting to look cool, wanting to not be awkward, wanting to
Mhm.
like look like you knew everything and were totally fine on your own. And I wish, I tell them all the time, I wish I could give you this. And I think it is something that you unfortunately just have to go through
Yeah.
to earn. But, you know, I I think that that's something, if we all could just be a little more uncomfortable and push through awkward situations and be like, it would be a benefit, you
Yeah.
know? So I think I regret being embarrassed
Yeah.
and letting that limit my experiences when I was younger. Um,
Yeah.
so let's all just be awkward and, not be ashamed of our freak flags and let them fly.
Embrace, embrace the being uncomfortable.
Embrace being a little uncomfortable because it might really be worthwhile. And you'll
Yeah.
realize that it's not a big deal and, you know, everyone is worried about their own weirdness all the time.
Yeah. That's true. Like if you're experiencing the uncomfortable, somebody else in the room is also experiencing it. So it's just like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell my teenagers that all the time. I'm like, I guarantee you, like, nobody is looking at that zit on your face as hard as you are. Like nobody else has even noticed it, but you are obsessed with it because you pay way more attention to yourself than anybody else does. Because they're all worried about their haircut or the dress they're wearing or whatever is going on with them. But I think that we're all a little bit self-centered creatures, right? So we pay
Yeah.
more attention to our own stuff than we do to others, and there's something freeing about that um, if you can embrace it.
Yeah. Oh, that might be another good topic to have as for a focus for a month because, oh my goodness. Yes,
So much,
it's
yeah, so
so
much to talk
freeing.
about with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it is
Yeah.
so freeing for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Melissa.
You're welcome.
I'm still like, so like, I guess, like I'm kind of standing here in awe at the whole word dependent. I'm going to have to just like sit with that for a while. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining in and sharing your perspective.